Not much good can really come from my discussing why I studied African American, because if it doesn't, my reasons don't conform to the established protocols of rivalry in what the universities like to call the war for position, which means different things to different people. To me, it means the contested hot commodity of a tenured job. And it's not going to be heated. In fact, the way that black intellectuals and black scholars establish their authenticity isn't so much from peer review as to appeal to the dangerous extremes. And the legacy of some of the dangerous extremes is one of progressive leadership in the case of Malcolm X. So it's pointless to try to express some idea that's going to be appreciated for its scholarship or knowledge because I'm white. It's just going to be dismissed. And that's just as a matter of fact. And if you were to ask me, where did I, in my late teens, expect the ideas of transcending gender and sex and race go? I would have said to an absolute of human identity that was mutually respected across the board in human interaction. Well, that's all very nice. It doesn't work that way when it comes to disgruntled people, whether it's labor or black people or Latinos. They're pretty solid in their desire not to be homogenized into an identity of human um, mutual consideration. They're vying for jobs. So why did I bother doing it? I got in the game late in life. I mean, I wasn't out to get a job. I had settled on the fact that I was just going to be a library clerk, a part-time library clerk. Of course, I was earmarked for a top secret police extermination program, and the evidence for that is yet to make men out of the ones who didn't know about it. But I did want to know. You know, you could argue from the galaxy of Fox Media and UW Dialectical that I was overcompensating because Ming-Na Wen was right about me. I was a programmed Manchurian racist. I remember when I was at Temple University and studying with Zayed Hussein Nasser, upon whom be peace. A black Muslim asked me what I was doing with the good book. And he came over for a while, he said, "Wonder why you white?" And I said, "Because of the absence of the skin pigment melanin." He said, "No, it's because you're a deteriorating European, and in your next life you're going to be a hound." So I learned some things from my interaction with my peers and rivals. I recounted a Philadelphia bus encounter where a black man stared at me and said, "You're everything that I hate." I don't know. I didn't think to say you mean deaf. You hate deaf people. I was interested. I just wanted to know. I mean, it does help me appreciate my peers. Too often, black people um, followed the standard of conduct of the imperialist sectors to draw any generalities about them. And you're supposed to conform to a specific protocol when it comes to black people, but they don't in the least retain a constant characteristic themselves. They're very, very diverse. Some of them want to be rich like Oprah. Some of them want to perform in armed services like Lloyd Austin wanted to prove his loyalty to the Constitution and by service to Joe Biden. There's rivalries in medicine for good diagnostics and treatment. Talents in all of the different fields that there are in the human endeavor. And there's no way that I can choose one particular story. There's pharmacists, family doctors, people who own small stores, people who struggled to feed the children and were cold at night. It's the story of America. It's not really the story of black people. It's alone. It's the story of a whole way of life and thinking. And of course, there are popular causes in foreign countries that are black, African nations, and so forth, that are distinctive to their national heritage and circumstances. And there's imperial power struggles going on between the military behemoths and some of the more responsible approaches, like the Belts and Roads of the Chinese, have become popular, and I think that's good. But what interested me were just the fact that when I was a kid, I wanted to fit in and have peers. I went to a black school for a year, and it was really very nice. Really very nice. Had a pretty good experience there. Got my self-respect together. But so there were stories. I mean, I knew people who were part of the story, and the area I lived. I was born in 1960. I could hardly have missed, with a single mother who worked at a community college, um, the action on the streets. I mean, the changes in our society, the protocols, some of which are perfectly reasonable protocols. Affirmative action seemed like a perfectly reasonable protocol given what white people had done to exploit black labor to build our society. It seemed like it was called for. Never really understood why it wouldn't be. So I saw my father's GI Bill achievements. He was committed to schools. He drove a school bus in his retirement. I angled towards a certain style of literary achievement, which drew me to be impressed by some popular culture figures, as all young people are. There was nothing particularly unusual about that. But although they tried to mystify and stuff, I was just very happy. I worked with Urban Garrett in the Learning Center at the community college. He was a lovely, wonderful man. And Esther, who stood in the window as though she was looking for a ship on the horizon. and other people who were colleagues of my mother's um, profession. We're still friends with her now that she's in her 90s. But I did understand that Martin Luther King was the best leaders that our society had produced. And so the civil rights movement was an enormous special attraction when it could be found in a classroom because you learned about the antecedents of the civil rights movement, the era of segregation, the development of the NAACP from what was known as the Niagara movement. And it's beautiful, wonderful stories. I mean, people become intoxicated with that story of John Lewis, the very dour looking young man who led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Famous Edmund Pettus Bridge crossing when Jim Clark tried to commit civil disobedience on behalf of the segregationists, refused to register voters. So what's the big deal about voting? Is that you get representation that recognizes the legitimate claim on Commonwealth, accrued by taxation and maldistributed on the grounds of rights. It's just wrong. It's crazy. And the various actors who, lunatic people who came to lead the segregation movement and disguised themselves as roll with the times. It's not much point teaching about Ella Baker or Fannie Lou Hamer if you're white, but it's good to know about them. I mean, Fannie Lou Hamer saw some heavy times and was very beaten down with struggle, and she contributed to our folklore by aphorisms like, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. She had a good heart. And there's a whole pattern of complaining about white people being fake towards black people. I don't doubt that that's true. In fact, I don't doubt that it's true both ways. I saw a man abusing students who was black because he was insisting that it was white racism and only white racism was the problem. It's an argument as if you give all the power to black people, they're going to do what's best by your leg too, which is true, as would be nice, but it's an argument that comes packaged in snake oil. But there's no doubt of the effectiveness of organized black unionism, for example, that protects both sides of the aisle when it comes to the race. Black people have performed honorably in war, so much so that it became a huckster's point during the Vietnam War to belabor the nonviolence of the civil rights movement's leadership in the form of Martin Luther King, who opposed the war in Vietnam. He said, don't do this to the movement. Don't make it sound like we're mutinous. We're after common decency. If there had been a constituency for nonviolence as a human right and empowering international law, we wouldn't have gotten ourselves in a fix with some drone warrior uses the civil rights movement to sell the extermination and genocide of Gaza. Martin Luther King did not say, I have a dream when a black woman will lead a genocide program. No, sir, he did not say that. But Kamala Harris may as well have. It will be said that I soured on the deal because the black man came up with a psychological ploy of poisoning me to prove I was a man called horse or something, you know. I mean, but the truth is, secretly in the white mind, I really love a lot of those stories. Walking with the Wind was a classic book. It was really full of sobriety and retelling of good stories. It was common decency on the march, which is good. King's strength to love is good. I don't really remember when Walls Came Tumbling Down or Lay Bare the Heart, but I read some books about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party that set straight what Bob Moses and Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker were doing down south during what was known as the Long Hot Summer. And of course, there's the stories of Birmingham, Reverend Shuttlesworth, who crawled out of the rubble of his barn to continue his leadership of the movement. After a bombing, they got to calling it Birmingham. Of course, you see the reasons why black people can lose it and hate white people. If you draw a generality from something like a bombing of a church, I don't know that they draw the generality across the border to the Palestinians, where some of the oldest churches on earth have been bombed. No, they vote Kamala Harris because she's the good kind. She means to help you get ahead. So, now I'm not going to vie with what I consider to be manifest ignoramuses. Joe Biden doesn't have to be a racist to be a psychotic. Why did I do it? I could sum it up in one very poignant moment and remark in a class with Professor Sundiata. I said something to him about Booker T. Washington. And he said Booker T. Washington could be a very perceptive man. See, that's higher learning in the story of the Civil Rights Movement. Because he's often depicted as, he wrote up from slavery in the Atlanta Compromise speech he gave and founded the Tuskegee Institute. In fact, the reason why the NAACP was called the Niagara Movement is because they went to Niagara Falls to get away from it. The spots. He was meeting with Woodrow Wilson back in the age of Birth of a Nation when D.W. Griffith got a screening at the White House. That horrible racist trash, which is epic Hollywood origins, but it was all tied up with Mussolini and the grotesquerie of the coming rages of the German Fuhrer. I mean, Gandhi was around in the 20s. And so there was reason for hope. But I think that the situation with the issues of what establishing priorities that existed between the people who believed in the NAACP and integration through the courts and laws, the suit and tie people in New York and struggle with the willingness to be separate but equal, to develop black people by their own skill and honesty and courage. And obviously, the NAACP won that argument. W.E.B. Du Bois won that argument. But so you don't hear a lot of good things about Booker T. Washington. But a learned man told me Booker T. Washington could be a very perceptive person. But that struggle that was going on affected some of the great artists like Zora Neale Hurston, because Richard Wright was afraid she was going to make black people into a cartoon by her linguistic anthropology. Make it too easy to caricature as ignorant people who to be laughed at, which was not true. And of course, you had some really great progressive leaders like Hubert Harrison, who was an atheist, who was listed as the top 10 sightseeing attractions in New York, a soapbox order, worked in the post office. Introduced Marcus Garvey, a great man who never had a Titanic. The White Star Line was the Titanic. The Black Star Line collapsed because he was scammed. But he didn't put people on board a ship and had them into an iceberg. I mean, you can't deny that some things have gone wrong in black civil society. But it isn't because they're black people, it's because they're human beings. So that's the reason why I studied it, was because I wanted to hear the stories and know something, do something, be something. So what I am is a bitter homebody, but at least I know something.